the Radio Today podcast with Jen Seyderhelm.
Welcome to the Radio Today podcast. Thank you for joining us. Steve Ahern is with me again. And Steve, it's been a couple of weeks since the last Survey 4 was released, and it's felt like most of the news since then has been podcast related, or this whole new world of what a podcast actually is.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's good. We're in a time of reinvention, so why not?
Yeah, I was trying to think of the right way to phrase it. So podcasting feels like it's the new radio and video is the new audio, and I never thought I'd be saying such a thing.
Blasphemy.
Yeah, isn't it? You have had a long chat with Kyle Sandilands ahead of the launch of his new show in less than 2 weeks' time now.
Yes, when you interview Kyle, you just wait tentatively for the chance to ask a question as he goes from one topic to another. And when you think you can interrupt, you butt in. So, yes, I interviewed Kyle, or shall we say Kyle interviewed me. Anyway, there's so much interesting stuff. It's always worth listening to when you get Kyle. We talked for about 50 minutes. And then he had to go for an interview with the Australian Financial Review. And the funny thing about that was it was one of those lunch interviews they do, lunch with so-and-so newsmaker at some fancy restaurant. Anyway, Kyle was taking the interviewer to McDonald's Cremorne, and he expected the bill to be $30. So I wonder how it will be written up in the Financial Review this week.
Oh, I can't wait. Gosh, that's what he's good at, turning things on its head. And I also have to just say, not knowing any of that story, that really resonates in this time when people are really struggling financially. It would have looked really bad if they were at some swish place, whereas Kyle at McDonald's makes me kind of go, yeah, there's something in that resonates with the audience that listens to Kyle Sandilands.
Yeah, he's made a lot of money, but he's also got the common touch and the everyman thinking. So, yeah, that's part of his connection to the audience.
Also this week, I want to speak about Mamamia. It's been possibly one of the other biggest topics alongside Kyle Sandilands, and a little bit of a chat about Brisbane and an article I read this week that has been a thought starter for me about Sydney execs. Melbourne execs just don't get Brisbane. They're trying to. They're going to really, really need to ahead of the Olympics, but they're not. But I'll come back to that. First, though, what were your thoughts about how the show is going to land?
I think it's going to land well. I think it's going to land successfully. And I think Kyle is going to turn up every day to do it because he's motivated. So the two parts of that long interview were about Kyle himself and his interaction with people, and also about the business decisions he's making. So on the Kyle personal side, he told me that he's lost 15 kilos, he's feeling healthy, and he was kind of a bit introspective. He's had a bit of time to think and spend time with his family. He asked at one stage, am I that arsehole that people say I am? And he said he'd been thinking a lot about that.
Annette Sharp says I'm an arsehole and I'm a this and everything. Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't even know myself. That's what I was trying to catch myself. And my wife was saying, that's ridiculous. That's not who you are. And there is a difference between when you're in full flight and performing on the radio show to here. Like, I'm never screaming and swearing at my wife or my child. And it's just a different situation. It's not a caricature, but it's like an exaggerated part of my personality at work. It's a different beast.
So we had a bit of a talk about Kyle as Kyle and Kyle the performer. He also talked about his health. He said that he probably didn't realise it, but some of the tension and the change in dynamics between he and Jackie, that some of that was probably stressing him out. He didn't realise it, and that was part of his sickness.
I've lost about 15 kilos too since this tragedy happened with the Kyle and Jackie O show. I haven't been ill, I think a lot of the stress and the illness was around maybe something I wasn't really conscious of happening with the show. So while Jackie might have been eroding away her thoughts or the friendship or whatever happened there, time will tell there, I might have just been blind to the fact, but handling it in my own sort of internal headache, feeling sick way. I feel that I've shed that feeling good, because some people have said, oh, is he going to show up every day? Oh, fuck off, loser. But, obviously, I'm not going to register my email and put that quote in, but I'm yelling it at the phone.
I was going to ask you that.
I'm yelling. Thanks, guys. Thank you, industry, for your positive notes and your feedback.
You do care about your audience from what you've been saying, and
yes.
It's been obvious for years. But what about the audience who can't pay the $100? Have you got some plan to give them 5 minutes a day free or some kind of
well, this is what I say to them. I was like, hey, if you just have one less hit of meth a week, you will be able to afford the app.
Oh, I've got feelings on that, Steve. Let me start with the health first. One of the things that I thought about this week is the brain aneurysm, which I think has kind of been forgotten. So I'm speaking from personal experience here, or an understanding of it, in that my own mother had a aneurysm on her heart, and doctors monitor it and monitor its growth, and it will get to a point, and this is effectively what Kyle was alluding to when he spoke about having his own, that it gets to a point where the doctors say, you are now at a point where you have to go in and get surgery, or else at any time it could rupture. My mother reached that critical point. We're talking millimetres, Steve, and had to go in and have it tended to. And I think of that with regard to Kyle, because that is also sitting in the background there. Yes, he has taken his health more seriously in the last couple of months, but the aneurysm doesn't just magically vanish with 15 kilos. And so I am conscious that his health has been a talking point in the past, but that is still in the background. But the second bit about the $100, Steve, is I think that in 3 months' time, Kyle is going to offer it cheaper, the subscription, so that people can come in later. He's already sort of said that he's given discounts or freebies to long-term listeners who can't afford it, which is great. But I also feel like he's going to have to do something closer to the Mamamia model to sustain the product long-term, because Mamamia does a very clever thing at the moment. And I only did this after I had a bit of a deep dive after in the podcast ranker that came out a week or so ago. Mamamia, across the last 4 months, Steve, has gone up by 300,000 monthly listeners, then down by that amount, then up by that amount, then down by that amount. And 300,000 monthly listeners is the same as the show that is number 13 on the ranker. That's a huge amount, right? And I can only attribute it in part. I've reached out to Triton. I haven't had a response, but to how Mamamia is dabbling with video, and they've been doing that since March. Some of the episodes are video recordings, which I think of my thought, and I have no clarification on this yet, is that sometimes they've been measured and sometimes they haven't, and that makes up the
I saw your article on that, and I think in general, measurement of YouTube podcasts is not taken into account in the podcast ranker. So it could well be that. So they could be getting the same numbers, but measurement, and don't get me started on measurement, because all our measurement methods have to change because ways of listening and consuming are changing. But
absolutely.
At the moment, the measurement methods don't capture everything in the way that new consumers are consuming our content.
But what Mamamia does, and I think this is so smart, is that let's say they've got 3 episodes that come out in a brief period. One is subscriber and one is a public release. And the public release is the video version. And I think Kyle is going to have to do something like that, because if it's only subscriber, then it's like having a paywall in your article, isn't it? So news.com.au, which is free, or we who are free might say, Kyle said such and such and such and such, but people can't listen to it if they're not a subscriber. And it's going to be a deterrent rather than I better subscribe, if they just want to know the gist of what's going on.
Yeah, it's a real quandary, a double-edged sword for publishers. And, Kyle's going to be a publisher, an audio publisher. He's starting up his own publishing channel, basically. And publishers are constantly making these decisions as to whether have an advertising model where you give away your content for free to get the eyeballs or the earbuds, and you monetize that with advertising, or you accept that advertising is going away to lots of different platforms now and is fragmented. So you make people pay. Years ago, Radio Info put in a paywall. I didn't think it was such a good idea at the time. We lost about 70% of our readership who until then were reading it for free. But the other 30% who paid helped us make more money at the time than we had been making from the advertising. I remember when News Limited put in their paywall years ago, Rupert Murdoch said, we've lost 90% of our readers, but the 10% who are paying are giving us more money than the whole 100%. So it's a real quandary, and the way people are consuming content on the internet is changing. I think people are more willing to pay for good original content now, but what's the tipping point and how much do you give away free is the thing. And Kyle, elsewhere in the interview, the whole interview is going to be on our Radio Info podcast channel. And at one point, we were talking about would he give away things free, and he said, with a few accompanying expletives, he said no. But then he said, but, people buy expletive mops from Danos in, 4 easy installments. So maybe I'll let them pay by installments, something like that. So probably he is thinking about it, but he is going to have that $99 upfront and no discounts and no pay by the month from what he is saying right now.
Oh, gosh. We'll see. Okay, so the other thing that Mamamia offers is that you can get discounts on certain products that come with your subscription model, so that's nice. They've got a Move platform. And then the other thing that Mamamia offers, which is the part I was a subscriber of them, that I particularly liked was their written articles. And a lot of those are only accessible if you are a subscriber. Some of them are also free, but it's a mix. And Mamamia's subscription per annum is $89, or you can do it for $10 a month, which I know Kyle is only doing the one yearly one at this point in time. But $89 is cheaper in my mind. In fact, I don't think this is unrealistic. I think you're getting a lot more there.
Yeah, well, they're certainly offering a lot, and it's a fantastic business model. Kyle is thinking the same. He's looking at the Adrian Portelli model, Mr. Lamborghini guy, who has that club, and people pay to be in the club and they can win cars and gold bars and all that sort of thing. Well, Kyle's going to do the same. He's got a threshold. He wants to make his money invested in the platform back first. And he told me, and we've run the story on Radio Info, that he's now covered the first 2.5 years. So he's made enough money to keep going for 2.5 years, even before he started. So in business, that's not too bad. But he's then got a series of thresholds where he really wants to look after his listeners. And if they subscribe, he will offer them gold bars, like a radio contest, win a gold bar, or a winning wheel sponsored by Winnings Appliances, where you might win an appliance. And he said, certain thresholds, if he gets up to a certain amount of subscribers and income, he'll give away cars. If he gets to 2 million subscribers, he'll give away a house every year. So I guess he's thinking along similar lines of value adds to his loyal listeners.
That's fascinating. And it's going to be very interesting to watch. My red flags are, and you can see that Kyle is healthier. That I'm not denying that, but my red flags are his health. What's going to happen on those days when he's not well? I don't think the show can work with this wonderful team he's built up, I still don't think it can work without Kyle being there. Whereas in the good old KISS days, Jackie O could man the fort while Kyle was away.
Well, that's very interesting too. And I talked to him about the team and about the co-host. He very clearly told me there will be no new co-host in the sense of a Jackie. But then he talked about how there was kind of a second tier, like Brooklyn, in the KISS lineup. He's got Mary, the newsreader, and others also playing that role in the new team. But there is no co-host. So, yes, I think that's rightly a red flag for maybe those listeners. I don't know if there's a refund button on the site. If he doesn't come, I'll bet there's not. But, he said something about that when we were talking about would there be a co-host.
Yeah. Is there someone else?
No, there's always going to be a seat available if Jackie wants to come in permanently or as a guest, but there is no one else. It's just me. There's no replacement to Jackie, so to speak. I always said to Jackie, we both said to each other, we would, if we ever stopped working with each other, if one of us died, is what we said, we would never replace that person. So I'm never going to replace Jackie, but I still need to put a show together.
I have thought a lot about this, and in fact, a Radio Info article I did was on the gradual changes in Jackie O that perhaps went unnoticed to get to the point where February 20, when the show imploded, happened. And what Kyle has done now is he's surrounded himself with, I think he's done so well with the people he's picked up because he knows them, they're really invested, and Bruno Boucher is just I hope you hear this, Bruno. I think you're a genius. They're buying the website of Kyle and Carl, all the little things Bruno does behind the scenes that is always with keeping Kyle front and centre in these discussions. But Mary, as you mentioned, Mary Madigan, who's come over from news.com.au and is going to be newsreader / co-host. Then you've got Jamie, as in Mayo, who is going to be the executive producer. And I'm just going to mention people like Alfie Laguza as well, who all have bits that Kyle won't want to tend to, right? Kyle's not going to want to do the Bachelor recaps. We know he hates this sort of stuff, but that can be Mayo's bit. That can be Mary's bit. If they want to talk Western Sydney Bogan, he's got a team who can have those conversations. And one of the things that I think was the issue with Kyle and Jackie O, the big catalyst, was that Kyle refused to read Jackie O's book. And Kyle said, I don't read books. He's also said beforehand that he doesn't like watching all these reality shows that they've got to discuss. And so he is going to be able to get those people to do the heavy lifting on the things that he doesn't want to do. And the point is, we all know Kyle doesn't want to do it, right? But if you have next year's maths guest who's come into the show, I think behind the scenes you'll have someone like Mayo say to them, look, Kyle doesn't love the show, but you're here as a guest. We're across everything that's happening. He's going to have a chat to you, blah, blah, blah. And it's different because previously it'd be like, come on in, Jackie's been watching the show. So in a lot of ways, he's surrounded himself with the people who get to do all the stuff and cover the stuff that he just doesn't give a rat's ass about.
I think that's a really good point. In fact, I asked him about that and he told me about the team.
Why have you chosen those people? Have you chosen one for the laughter, for someone who'll feed you a line that you can react on? Tell me a bit about that.
The first two we put on was the first two redundancies, which was young Alfie, who's our little Italian 23-year-old who thinks he's Lebanese, lives in a Lebanese community, is always cuz this, cuz that. He's the average tradie out there, off to work every morning. So he's their voice. We've got Bruno. Who knows who Bruno's the voice of the mentally insane and many other groups, unhappy dads, lots of other different types. Mayo's a young mum. She's got 2 kids, but Mayo's fantastic behind the scenes. She's a great energizer of the other staff as well. And yeah, she's the one that resigned from KISS to come here. And I actually got some notes from some other network programmers from other networks, the Novas and what have you. And some of the AM stations saying, oh, you've nabbed yourself the best EP in the country. So well done. So that's nice that she's got that respect. I won't tell her that because she'll want more cash.
Yeah.
And then Hulk's here. He's our audio guy, but he's the ex-military paratrooper guy. He came to us full of PTSD, and we all talked about that, and he just feels comfortable here, and he just feels like, he said, since we had that big chat and everyone's so open about their own fucked up personalities, he said, I don't actually have the PTSD anymore. He said, it's gone. And Bruno's like, oh, you're curing mental illness. And I said, yeah, I'm not sure whether we are. But everyone here's got their own story. Everyone really does when you scratch under the surface. So to hear the different people's point of views, I like it because I often learn things from hearing someone else's point of view that I've not even taken into consideration. But you have to walk in their shoes to be able to have that opinion. That's why there's so many different types here.
Yeah, so you nailed it in talking about them, and he's really well aware of the kind of personalities he's putting together.
Oh, and the last person I haven't mentioned is Pedro, who is a previous Kyle and Jackie O show person who's done all the video website. He's done, again, kudos to you, Pedro, behind the scenes, what he's set up. It looks amazing, and he's done that in a very short time frame. So, yes, he's got all the bits of the conversation there that mean that he, a lot of the time, doesn't have to do the work himself. And that is what Karl Stefanovic is lacking.
Yeah, I think that's true. You know what? Kyle loves to tease whether there's any truth in it or not. And when I talked to him, he teased, I said, well, look, you're really developing a radio platform here. What you've got, you're going to put reruns and best ofs and catch-ups and music on your platform to keep content going all day. And I said, well, that's really like a radio channel. And he goes, yeah, well, Carl could do Drive, and some old talk radio announcers could come back and do a show. So the potential is there. And a part of what I was trying to get at, because, we're a professional industry website, so we want to go just beyond the gossip, even though there's plenty of gossip and plenty of funny stories when you talk to Kyle. But I also wanted to get to the business end of it. And I see what Kyle is doing is creating a new radio channel in a way and experimenting with new ways of doing it. A couple of decades ago, Doug Mulray did that when he left Triple M Breakfast. He started his own streaming video channel, and it broke new ground in the very early days of the internet and gathered an audience for something that nobody knew they wanted. And perhaps Kyle is doing the same thing here, and it will help the radio industry reinvent its delivery mechanisms. We're not reinventing radio shows, but we could be reinventing the way radio is delivered in the future.
Yeah. And the one additional thing I want to mention about that Carl as well is that I think that Carl has really come to an understanding of all the things we talked about, the other people in the team who help with the heavy lifting every morning on his show. So it's just Carl. And yes, Carl will have a person or two helping him behind the scenes. But the one thing that Kyle does, you are likely to get asked the difficult questions. There's no, that's just the way Kyle is. He's not going to come and just ask nice things about pretty flowers. Whereas I think that Karl Stefanovic, unfortunately, has now kind of sat himself into a different category where these nice chats he's been having with quite controversial people, it's different. It's quite different to what you'll get going on to Kyle's show. And what we will see in months to come is the guests who choose to go on one but not on the other, or onto radio shows, etc. And one case in point is the Prime Minister, who has always been a fairly good friend of Kyle and Jackie O in days gone by. So we'll see who the first big name guests are. That brings me to Mamamia again. So the big talking point over the last fortnight has been the appointment of Luca Levine, who is Mia Friedman and Jason Levine's son, who is 28 years old and a man. They've built it up in much the same way as I'm sure that Kyle would like to do himself, to the point where, there's all these different threads and things that he can do with it. But this period of time feels like it's an absolute changing of what people are spending their time on. And I am astonished at just how many people are listening to Mamamia out loud, just out loud, and how that impacts radio. Now, with regard to Luca being made CEO, my own reflections on it afterwards were, I'm a mother of sons. If I had built a business with my own husband from the ground up and one of my sons had displayed 10 years of interest in doing that, then I would likely do the same thing.
Yeah, and why not? It's their business. I always thought about World Audio. You remember that? That was the Challenger, the little station, little company that floated on the stock exchange and tried to buy all those licenses and get digital licenses. And in the end, it flopped. But it was using a lot of other people's money, which was lost in the end, compared with Bill Corrales, who had his own money. He also had his ups and downs and, maybe lost money and certainly ran the network as he wanted. But the difference was it wasn't other people's money. It was his money invested. So it was his own family company, and it's Mia Friedman's own family company there. So why not? If it's a public company, sure, different. And I get it, it's female skewed content and there's a male in charge and nepotism and maybe criticism from staff about, we didn't get our chance to run it. But in the end, it's their company, so give them a break.
Yeah. And something you just said in there too is that, it's a lot of responsibility leading an organisation, and we've seen it in the radio industry with all the changes, particularly at ARN, in SCA, that have happened over the last less than 2 years. Running an organisation is not fun and flower. It's really hard work, and you are the person who is the face that is responsible for all the outcomes that come with it. And Luca has wanted to take that on. I just don't know that there's anyone else who would have been sitting there going, no, I'm really up for that. I'd like to be the CEO who could come with the level of time and experience of getting to know what was happening behind the scenes. And fundamentally, and this was my other core point, is that it leaves Mia to keep making and doing, and the responsibility can be, for the day-to-day business side of things, can be shifted to Luca.
Yeah, quite right. Let's wish him success. Good luck.
Yeah. A final point to Mamamia is Mia was transparent through her channels. Kyle has been talking to everybody, which is also savvy for Kyle and very Kyle. But Mamamia talked about the appointment in an episode of the podcast, which is freely available, by the way. You didn't need to be a subscriber for that. And the other thing, Steve, which I think is also something, if Bruno's not already on this, Mamamia have a chat group or a Out Louders group, which I have joined. And I have very rarely been in a group which is so generally positive about something. They love the podcast and they talk in a healthy and constructive fashion about things that come out of the podcast. And I was so pleasantly surprised by this group of largely women who are on board 100% on the Mamamia message, and Luca. Anyway, Mia posted in there about the decision, wrote quite a long post talking about the whys and the wherefores. And the response to that was, by and large, I would say 99% supportive.
That's good. That's good. It's their own social channel. I guess you would expect that. And there was criticism elsewhere, some of which Lee Sales shut down on her platform, as we know. But yes, good to have that support. Interestingly, in my Kyle interview, he talked about the people who were skeptical. You heard a little reference to it in that grab we played earlier, but he talked about the people who were skeptical and saying it'll never last and, he'll be off sick. Well, there were some expletives there in his response to that, but some of it was the he was referring to the comments on Radio Today. We moderate our comments, and whatever you might see that seems bad on Radio Today, there's a lot more that you don't see because we don't publish it, because I don't like that negativity either. I think fair comment, hard comment, based on fact or based on assessment, sure, but when people are just having a go, then we just don't publish that. But Kyle had read those comments and he had thought that he might post something in return to them, but he refrained.
There you go. Oh, that's interesting. The other thing I want to talk about that happened this fortnight is that the very short-lasting breakfast show on 4BC in Brisbane, which was Sophie Formica and Dean Miller, was unfortunately, they were let go after an equally unfortunately very poor Survey 4 results. And there was an article in the Courier Mail, Steve, by Mike Gambaro, and it's called Sydney Radio Bosses Just Don't Get Brisbane. And I read the article and, oh my goodness, I felt the article. I get it. Brisbane has been, I think Melbourne a couple of years ago was the most affected, but Brisbane in the last 18 months has seen all manner of disintegration of shows, reinstatements in the case of Robin Kipp and Corey Oates. You've got Ash Bradham, who left Nova under some strange circumstances. It's all been happening there. And I read the article and really sort of sat there and went, yeah, Brisbane is getting the arse end of decisions that are beyond their control. And it's deeper than this, because I would have thought, Steve, that the execs in Sydney and Melbourne who are running radio organisations where they have stations in Brisbane really need to up their game with an Olympics coming up in only a couple of years' time. Because when that happens, in the lead up to that happening, Brisbane is going to be the centre of everything for the period of time leading up, during, and probably immediately after. And yet, instead, they're getting the dregs.
Yeah, good point. I think that is pretty much the same for any network. When you're away from the centre of decision-making, then most cities feel that. It's a hard balancing act. I am totally for local content, and I totally agree that you have to be programming in the city of your radio station, and where possible, you have to have local people who are connected. That's on one side. But on the other side, you also have to make money. And so we've had the situation where particularly the publicly listed companies have understood that they need to make the most revenue from agencies. And where are the agencies located? Melbourne and Brisbane. What do they buy? They buy the biggest audiences in the country, Melbourne and Brisbane. What do they do after that? They tack on some others. And so they buy the next cities, and they buy probably the top 2 stations in those cities. So if you're a big network selling to an agency and you've sold your Sydney and Melbourne lead stations because you're in the top 3, then you'll do a bit of a deal for your station in the next market where you've got the most listeners. And that'll probably be the station that's the 1 or 2. And then you might even throw in the rest of the markets for almost nothing. So from the business side, I understand the business decision, but from the programming side, I think it's awful, because you do need to be in a city where you're broadcasting to, at least in your prime times, and you do need to make decisions about people who are really connected. And, you know, in the survey day chats I have with people from Nine Radio, now Tapped Media, Greg, with, the people from the other networks as well, the programmers, they are all they champion all of their stations. In the case of 4BC, you know, there was Greg acknowledging that it was a hard ratings survey last survey, and when you're in a publicly listed company, you have to acknowledge that. Otherwise, the market will say they're burying their head in the sand. They don't realise what's going on. They've got to make change. So you've got those dynamics pushing you to acknowledge it and to be seen to do something. When from a programming point of view, you also know that if you make decisions in head office further away from the local decisions, you might get it wrong. Now, Tapped Media don't have that big public company responsibility anymore, and let's hope that the decision that they've made this time for 4BC will be beneficial. But yes, you've got to acknowledge that article, that decision was made by people who live in Sydney, and probably Brisbane is their third or fourth market. So they would have other factors in their decision making as well.
I have been watching with interest Triple M in Sydney and Melbourne over the last 12 months. And without the fanfare, Triple M Sydney, for example, has steadily increased. Not monumentally, but exactly what you dream of as the exec behind it, just to watch it steadily grow. And I think one of the points of that is that they've been allowed to. They've had the time of bedding in and getting things together. And now, if I lived in Sydney, Steve, I would probably listen to a combination of Ben Fordham and then Triple M. That feels like Sydney to me. I think that it's really starting to resonate, and ARN is going to have to be very careful with what they do from here.
To be as local and connected to your audience with local personalities well known in that market in the long term is a good thing, even though in the short term there may be other decisions, commercial decisions.
Watch that with interest because we were several years out. But leading into the Olympics, let's say the 2 years up to that, the breakfast teams in that city are going to really want to reflect Brisbane. And so whoever it is who ends up being on 4BC breakfast, I think it needs to be a Brisbane decision, not a Sydney and Melbourne decision.
Yeah, true. And you need also good local managers and local programmers. They have a good team.
I think that'll do us for this week's episode.
A lot of good, strong topics we've discussed, and we'll do it all over again, maybe with less F words, unless I interview Kyle a second time. I was very tempted to quote Kyle, but we let Kyle quote Kyle.
He does it best. We'll catch you again in a couple of weeks' time.
See ya.
Radio Today with Jen Seyderhelm. Find more at radiotoday.com.au.
radiotoday.com.au